There is a specific kind of person walking through this world. Someone who looks normal, speaks normally, lives normally, yet feels like their existence is fading at the edges. Not dying, not depressed in the clinical sense, just disappearing. It's the quiet erosion of self, the subtle dissolving of identity, the slow unraveling of a voice that becomes too small to hear, even inside one's own mind. If you've ever looked in the mirror and felt like your reflection was more real than you, if you've ever spoken in a room and wondered why your words feel lighter than air, if you've ever lived your day as if you were watching someone else control your body, you already know this feeling. And here's the part that stings the worst. Nobody else notices, because people who slowly disappear do it silently. They don't scream, they don't break, they fade. Psychologically, these people exist in a strange twilight between presence and absence. They look functional, but inside they feel blurred, like the outlines of who they are have smudged. Their emotions are muted, their reactions feel delayed, their desires feel foreign. They describe life not as something they're living, but something happening on the other side of an invisible glass wall. But the question is, why? Why do some people drift out of their own existence without ever meaning to? It begins with one brutal truth. 1. They were taught to shrink. Subtly, gradually, consistently. People don't vanish randomly. They disappear because at some point, the world told them directly or indirectly that their presence was too much. A parent who silenced them, a friend who laughed at their vulnerability, a partner who dismissed their needs, a social environment that rewarded the quiet, compliant version of them but punished the real one. So they learned a survival skill: become smaller, take up less space, expect less, want less, need less. And what begins as self-protection slowly becomes self-erasure. The psychology behind this is painful. The brain starts to disconnect from parts of your identity that consistently get rejected. Not consciously, subconsciously. Piece by piece, it detaches. A dream here, a preference there. A part of your personality you stopped showing because someone made you feel foolish for it. People don't lose themselves in one moment. They lose themselves in quiet micro-abandons, tiny betrayals of their own authenticity. Until, eventually, they don't know what they enjoy anymore. They don't know what they want anymore. They don't know who they are anymore. And the scariest part, they don't know how to come back. 2. They feel life moving forward while they remain stuck. There is nothing more destabilizing than watching yourself live a life that looks fine on the outside, but feels spiritually vacant on the inside. These people sense time passing, days, weeks, years, yet internally they feel frozen, unchanging, unanchored, like a ghost walking through their own timeline. This creates a psychological split, a life that continues, and a self that doesn't. And when that gap gets too wide, disappearing becomes not a metaphor, but an emotional reality. There's a moment in life that almost no one talks about. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. No one notices it happening. It's the moment a person begins to fade. Not physically, psychologically. A soft, almost invisible collapse of identity. You don't wake up one day and say, "I'm disappearing." It's never that clear. Instead, it starts with small things. You stop correcting people when they misunderstand you. You stop sharing opinions because you assume no one cares. You start replacing your real feelings with empty phrases like "it's fine," "don't worry about it," "it doesn't matter." And before you know it, you've become a quiet spectator in your own existence. But here's the darkest part. People who are slowly disappearing are often the ones who look the strongest on the outside. They're the listeners, the reliable ones, the ones who never complain, the ones who always say, "I'm good," even when their soul is bleeding. And because they never make noise, the world assumes they are okay. This is the psychology of emotional erasure, a gradual deletion of the self. Psychologists describe it as a state where your internal world becomes more real than the external one. You think more than you speak. You reflect more than you act. You imagine more than you live. Your life becomes a place you observe, not participate in. It's like standing behind a glass wall, watching everyone else laugh, argue, connect, break, heal, while you remain stuck behind the transparent barrier, unseen, untouched, uninvited. And with time, you start believing things that are not true. If I vanished, no one would notice. If I speak, it'll annoy someone. If I ask for help, it'll be a burden. If I show emotion, it'll be weak. These beliefs are not reality, but to the fading person, they feel like reality. So they shrink. They soften their voice. They swallow their needs. They minimize their presence. And people around them say, "You're so chill. You're so easygoing. You're so quiet." But quiet doesn't mean peaceful. Sometimes quiet means gone. Sometimes quiet means I don't remember how to be myself anymore. And if you ever felt this way, like a background character in your own life, there's something important you need to understand. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because somewhere along the way, you learned that being fully yourself wasn't safe. Someone taught you that your voice wasn't welcome. Someone taught you your emotions were too much. Someone taught you your presence didn't matter. And now, you're still carrying that lesson even though the world around you has changed. But the next part is even more important. Most people who feel like they're disappearing aren't trying to escape life. They're trying to escape pain. And disappearing feels easier than being disappointed again. There comes a moment in every disappearing person's life when the truth finally becomes unbearable, not loud, not dramatic, but suffocatingly quiet. A moment when they realize, I don't remember the last time I felt like myself. And that sentence hits harder than any heartbreak. Because disappearing is not about losing others. It's about losing your own internal gravity, that force that once held your identity together. For most people, life feels linear. For disappearing people, life feels like a long hallway where each step echoes less and less, until even their own footsteps sound unfamiliar. They don't wake up and think, who am I? They wake up and think, who was I and when did the string snap? This slow dissolve shows up in tiny psychological fractures. 1. They forget what they used to care about, not because they stopped caring, but because their emotional system is overloaded. Their brain chooses survival, not passion. Numbness becomes a shield, not a symptom. 2. They can't feel present even in important moments, birthdays, conversations, achievements. Everything feels like watching a movie they're not in. They laugh on cue. They smile on schedule. But something in them whispers, this should feel different. 3. They experience a constant, low-level identity fog. It's not depression. It's not burnout. It's the terrifying sense that you've become the background character in your own life. You don't live days. You observe them. 4. Their mind rewinds everything. Every memory is replayed as if it belongs to someone else. Every decision feels like it came from an echo, not a person. And every emotion feels a second too slow, like their soul is buffering. This isn't weakness. This is psychological overload. What happens when your inner world has been neglected for so long that it collapses in on itself? And here's the darkest part. People who are slowly disappearing don't talk about it. Why? Because the moment they try to explain it, it sounds imaginary. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like something that shouldn't exist. So they say nothing. They wear the mask. They hide the distance behind practiced expressions. But inside, something is fading. The feeling of being anchored. The sense of I am here. The clarity of this is my life. And yet, there is a reason they haven't disappeared completely. It's because a very small, very quiet part of them is still fighting. A part that refuses to be erased. A part that aches for meaning, for connection, for a sense of self that doesn't vanish every morning. That tiny fragment is the key. That's the thread that can pull them back. Because disappearing isn't permanent. It's a signal, a psychological warning flare. And the people who feel like they're dissolving are often the ones on the edge of a profound transformation. Not because they're weak, but because they've outgrown a life that no longer fits. There is a moment in every disappearing person's life when they realize something terrifying. They're still physically here, but the world has quietly adjusted to a version of them that barely exists. People stop asking how you are. They stop noticing when you're silent. They stop checking if you're okay. Not because they're cruel, but because you've trained them to see you as the one who doesn't need much, the one who handles everything, the one who never complains. The tragedy is simple. When you stop showing your inner world, the world stops believing you have one. And this is where the slow disappearance becomes a psychological prison. The three phases of internal fading: people who feel like they're slowly disappearing usually go through three invisible stages. 1. The phase of minimization. You tell yourself, "It's not a big deal. I don't want to bother anyone. I can deal with it alone." This is where the fading starts. Not in a dramatic breakdown, but in the quiet moments where you choose silence over honesty. Your inner world shrinks, and the world outside never notices. 2. The phase of emotional ghosting. You start to pull away not because you hate people, but because you no longer recognize yourself in their eyes. You laugh when expected. You show up where needed. You function like a person, but inside, you feel more like a memory. Something that exists only by habit. You respond to life, but you no longer participate in it. 3. The phase of identity erosion. This is where the psychological danger peaks. Because when you disappear long enough, you forget what the real you ever felt like. You don't know what you enjoy. You don't know what you want. You don't know who you are when you're not performing a role. You look in the mirror and feel nothing. Not disgust, not admiration, just an eerie numbness. As if you're looking at someone whose story ended long ago. The paradox of the invisible person. You think, maybe I'm fading because no one cares. But the truth is harsher. You're fading because you've made yourself impossible to see. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but because disappearing felt safer than being misunderstood, rejected, or judged. You chose invisibility because visibility hurt too much. And slowly, painfully, your mind adapted to it. Your brain began shutting down desires, impulses, needs, anything that made you too much. You didn't just disappear from others. You disappeared from yourself. Why the world doesn't notice? People assume you're fine because your suffering is silent. Not dramatic, not chaotic, not loud. You fade in ways people aren't trained to recognize. You stop initiating conversations. You smile without feeling anything. You say I'm good with mechanical precision. You exist in rooms like furniture, not a person. And because you don't scream for help, your absence becomes normal. Your fading becomes expected. Your silence becomes just how you are. But here is the secret. No one truly disappears without leaving traces. Your mind is still alive. Your soul is still trying to speak. Your identity is still waiting beneath the dust. You haven't vanished. You've gone dormant. You've gone quiet. You've gone deep inside yourself. Not because you're weak, but because you've been fighting too long with no place to fall apart. And part 5 will reveal what it takes to return, not to the old you, but to the version you were always meant to become. They say the human soul doesn't vanish in an instant. It fades. First in silence, then in habit, then in the stories you tell yourself about who you are. But here is the truth nobody tells people who feel like they're slowly disappearing. You don't fade because you're weak. You fade because you've spent years carrying a version of yourself that never belonged to you. A mask you thought you had to wear. A life you thought you were supposed to live. People who disappear aren't empty. They're overflowing with suppressed emotions, unspoken thoughts, unrealized potential that has no space to breathe. So the real path back is not about becoming visible to others. It's about becoming undeniable to yourself. Because invisibility is not cured by attention. It's cured by presence. Presence with your own mind. Presence with your own desires. Presence with the inner voice you've ignored for so long that it now speaks in whispers. Here is something your mind has been trying to tell you quietly, patiently, painfully. You do not disappear when the world stops seeing you. You disappear when you stop seeing yourself. That is why the first step back is not social, it's internal. You must look at yourself again, really see yourself without judgment, without running away, without hiding behind busyness or survival mode routines. You must ask yourself the questions you've been avoiding. What part of me did I abandon to keep the peace? What aspect of my identity did I bury to belong? What dream did I hide because others wouldn't understand? Who was I afraid to disappoint? Because your disappearance began the moment you chose to silence these answers. But here's the part that people never expect. The moment you speak the truth, your shape starts returning. Not because the world changes, but because you do. Your boundaries sharpen. Your thoughts gain weight. Your emotions gain color. Your voice gains gravity. Your life stops being something you observe and becomes something you inhabit again. People think rebirth is loud, dramatic, explosive. But for those who have been fading for years, rebirth is subtle. It begins with a single rebellion, the decision to stop shrinking. And once you stop shrinking, you start appearing, slowly, then suddenly, in the mirror, in conversations, in decisions, in the trajectory of your own future. You return, not the version the world demanded, not the version you performed, but the version you lost along the way. The version that always existed beneath the layers of silence. The version that refused to die, even when you felt yourself fading. So here is the truth you must carry forward. You were never disappearing. You were becoming the person you were always meant to be. Once you stopped vanishing to make others comfortable. And now that you're back, don't ever let yourself fade again.